Today is a day we remember history. I spent a lot of time over the last month with the archivist in another congregation, organizing a church history much like ours. If some of you remember, when I got arrested for civil disobedience, I was required to do community service. So I was able to do community service with another church, helping them remember their history. Some pieces of their history were found in the board minutes. The board's response to the minister who encouraged people from the pulpit to use LSD is interesting and a story for another day. Others were found in ministers' reports, newsletters, or letters from members of the congregation. These are some of the ways we remember who we are. We also hold our memory in poems, stories, paintings, plays. Archivists help us hold memory. On this day, we know that how we remember our history and our values shapes who we are and where we're going. Today, Veterans Day, is also Armistice Day. It marks the end of World War I in the United States and across the world. And on this day, we remember those whose lives were lost. And beyond that, we remember individuals who have devoted or given part of their lives in service to their country, sometimes against their choice. So we're going to wrestle just a bit with our history, our days of remembrance, and how our values invite us to think about who we are. Near the end of World War I, a Canadian doctor, John McCrae, wrote a poem, In Flanders Fields. Some of you know that. In Flanders fields the poppies blow, between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky the larks, still bravely singing, fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders fields. In thinking about this poem and researching it a little more, I came across a fact. Poppy seeds lay dormant until the soil is disturbed. When I read this, I immediately pictured that field of poppies in the poem. These poppies had grown not because of animals digging in the ground or people planting seeds and turning up the soil. They had grown not as a result of children playing or storms rolling through the area. I imagined a field of bright red poppies that had grown from war. They grew because there was fighting, death, and burial. They grew from the blood of soldiers. Poppies lay dormant until the soil is disturbed. And today is a day that reminds us that wars end. It's Veterans Day in the United States, Remembrance Day for our neighbors to the north, Armistice Day for us all. Countries all across the world remember the end of the first war of the world. And many people wear or share poppies as a symbol of what this day means. But it's not that simple. Like the flag up here with me this morning, our remembrance, our honoring of the day is complicated. And judging by the number of people who reminded me that this flag needed to be put up over the past week, its presence elicits a variety of feelings from many of you. I imagine some of you are remembering the disagreements and the discussions that resulted in the decision to have it up here for Veterans Day. But I suspect the feelings go even deeper than that. Some of us believe the separation of church and state extends to the symbols of the state. Others feel concerned by the way people on one end of the political spectrum have taken control of what the flag is and what it's supposed to mean. Maybe you're delighted that we remembered that it's up here. It's a reminder of something you devoted your life to. Or it's a reminder of something someone in your family died for. Perhaps you feel a sense of rightness that we are honoring Veterans Day this way. And I suspect many of you have mixed feelings and other responses that I haven't named. I've been reading about a movement in Canada where some people wear white poppies instead of red poppies to signify a desire for peace. Several thousand people have made that choice. Here in the United States, some people refuse to acknowledge Veterans Day at all or face it with a complex and diverse set of feelings. Some feel that honoring the flag today or wearing red poppies respects war and unnecessary sacrifice. Others feel that their choice dishonors those who died for the country. The reality is that holidays like this, holidays that honor our soldiers, that could be seen as honoring the experience and reality of war, can be difficult for Unitarians. We tend at best to have those complicated feelings. Poppies lay dormant until the soil is disturbed. And it seems right that war is an area that disturbs us as Unitarians. The reason we come together is to honor what it means to exist in the world, to be alive. We are not unified by a belief in an afterlife that rewards us for our deeds, but we are unified by a belief that what we do in this life, how we act in this interdependent web of existence now, matters. And I want to be a part of a faith that is drawn toward a belief that we can overcome the need for war, that the ends don't justify the means. I recognize the power in this perspective. And I know that as I have thought of Veterans Day and how to speak to you about it, I've also felt mixed emotions and even a little fear. In his own sermon on Remembrance Day, my colleague, Reverend Brian Kiley, says, "I'm a Unitarian minister. I serve a congregation of Unitarians. We like to think of ourselves as open and free-thinking, but there tend to be some strongly held opinions in our community." Yeah? We can have strongly held opinions. Once in a while, we discover we are maybe not as free-thinking as we would like to believe ourselves to be. Once in a while, we discover that there are some ideas that are not so acceptable. And just as an aside, I'm not sure that's a bad thing. And he says, I can't always predict which ideas will be contentious. The subject of war, however, is one of those. Reverend Kiley was writing this in Canada, but he could just as easily have been speaking to one of our congregations. We as a country have not always made the best choices about war. We've thrown the lives of our military into situations motivated more by money than justice. We've declared wars without clear objectives. And it's easy to see that. It's easy to stand against it. I am from a family, as it sounds like many of you are, that has sent several of our young men to serve in our nation's military. And they've gone for so many reasons. Even as we recognize the need to resist, to stand against injustice, Unitarian Universalists remain a faith that is largely anti-war. And like us, our history is not that simple. I know we have people who in this room who have served in the military, and I suspect we have people in this room who have protested war in all its forms. Sometimes those are the same people. As a faith tradition, we have people who believe war is never the answer and some who believe it's necessary sometimes. We have people who believe in honoring soldiers and others who fear that honoring soldiers is akin to supporting war. We have people with conflicted feelings who might be straddling more than one camp. So part of me wants to stand before you with a clear answer. As a Unitarian Universalist minister, I've studied many religious traditions, and they're pretty universally clear about that whole thou shalt not kill thing. So I really, at times, want to stand up here and give you those concrete answers, just as I wish I could stand here and tell you that I believe there is always another way, that war is never the necessary choice. But I can't do that. And don't get me wrong, I'm not in favor of war. The decision to fight, to risk the lives of those who stand for our country should never be made lightly. I devoutly wish for the day when we will no longer send anybody into battle with people from other countries. But I don't believe that's the world we live in now. Wars happen, and human beings are often drawn into conflict with each other. The decision to fight, to enter as a country into war, should never be an easy one. And I don't believe the decision to avoid entering into war should be easy either. I struggle even more at this point because I don't trust those currently in charge with the lives of my friends who are in the military. Unitarian Universalism draws from different sources for insight. And our second source is described as words and deeds of prophetic women and men, which challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love. Reverend Kiley responds to this, well, the transforming power of love might suggest a peaceful response, but confronting powers and structures of evil with justice certainly doesn't exclude violence. And I wonder if compassion for the victims might actually stir violence within us. That's a hard thing to think about. Poppies lay dormant until the soil is disturbed. How has our faith wrestled with this idea before? Not long after I became a Unitarian Universalist, the Unitarian Universalist Association started studying the possibility of adding an 8th principle regarding pacifism. Does anybody remember this? Maybe didn't come this far. You remember? Yeah. Yeah. That's a fair point. I mean, how many of us can recite the 7 principles now? Well, I joined the group of people in my congregation who were gathering to talk and respond to the UUA's question. I joined partly because I knew I was likely to be the only one in the group who disagreed with the idea of adding the principle, and I was. It's that tendency to be contrary that makes me UU. I carried with me some images into that discussion. Here's one of them. Starhawk, an activist and witch, once wrote a book called The Fifth Sacred Thing. Anybody read it? Great, then you won't know the story. In this book, there are 2 communities, and one community attacks the other. The second community, absolutely pacifist, they refuse to take up arms against their neighbors. I remember a scene from the book where members of the community are being killed one by one, yet another person stands up. Eventually, the pacifist community is successful. That image has stuck with me for years. It's a powerful story of hope and resistance. And it's one I want to follow. And at the same time, it taught me I can't be a pacifist. The ability to make a choice against violence is a hard one, and it requires more of me than I can give. I know that if someone were actively engaged in harming my niece, for example, I would take whatever steps were necessary to stop them. I don't see that involving asking them to a negotiating table to start talking about how we might come to an agreement that they would stop eventually. There are times when world governments and people who run them are creating such structures of evil and oppression and downright bullying that they must be stopped. And I say again, this is not to say that war should be the easy solution or the go-to response. In the face of violence, I'm not sure there is an easy solution. It seems there are times when not intervening can allow as many deaths and possibly even more suffering than armed conflict. Reverend Kiley points out there may only be choices between two costly and terrible solutions. Someone always suffers when violence happens. It's important to remember that. This is part of a poem by Barbara Kingsolver called "The Loss of My Arms and Legs." I'm told I cannot allow the wounds of all the world to bleed through my one body, that I will have nothing left for my own, nothing for tying the ribbons that bring them home. The men who drop bombs, I understand they are saving their tears for their daughters. I am the only animal that can die 100 times and still fear death inside. If we expect survival, allow me this. As long as I continue to be cut, let me still bleed. We can't become immune to violence. We can't become immune to the choices we make. I feel uncomfortable with absolutes. Another of the top 10 signs you might be a UU. I remember the violence we are faced with every day. And I wonder if this country's history with war, we've been engaged in some war or another for most of our history. Does it connect some way into our relationship with guns and the mass shootings that terrorize us? Even as we consider the possibility of violence in response to violence, I encourage us to also remember the decision made by the Knoxville Unitarian Universalist congregation. Do you remember this? 10 years ago, a man came into one of our congregations in Knoxville, Tennessee, and shot people. This congregation, more than most, had to face the terror of their sanctuary being violated. And the church considered their response. They considered allowing people to arm themselves with guns. They decided against that. But then they considered adding metal detectors in their building. Until someone asked, would we put the metal detectors before or after the welcome table? The congregation made a choice then, a choice for peace, a choice for welcoming, a choice for sanctuary, even at the risk of safety. And yet they also made the choice to remember. This is what's so remarkable to me. They didn't repair the holes in their walls. I can't come to you and say that war is always the right answer or that every war we have been in has been just. I cannot come to you and say that staying out of international conflict is always the right answer and that every time we have avoided entering into war has been just. I can say to you that I believe every time we encounter suffering and injustice in the world, we must respond in some way. I believe the only way we will ever eliminate the need for individuals across the world to offer their lives in service to their countries is to allow ourselves to be disturbed by violence and suffering in many forms. Poppies lay dormant until the soil is disturbed, and then they grow. People who have joined the military over the years have done so for many reasons, but always with an awareness that they were offering to serve their country And many of their choices about where they would go, who they would work with, what they would wear and say and do, were offered in that service. People joined the military with an awareness that they could offer everything, including their lives, in service to their community, to their ideals. That is something I hope we are all able to honor. Dedication to ideals, the offering of service. Agreement with the specific belief or method is not necessary to honor an individual's choice to put everything on the line for freedom or community or safety or any of the number of reasons we human beings cast ourselves at one another. Before we close, I want to offer you one other poem. This is called Sunrise by Mary Oliver. You can die for it, an idea or the world. People have done so brilliantly, letting their small bodies be bound to the stake, creating an unforgettable fury of light. But this morning, climbing the familiar hills in the familiar fabric of dawn, I thought of China and India and Europe. And I thought of how the sun blazes for everyone just so joyfully as it rises under the lashes of my own eyes. And I thought, I am so many. What is my name? What is the name of the deep breath I would take over and over for all of us? Call it whatever you want. It is happiness. It is another one of the ways to enter fire. My dear spiritual companions, on this Veterans Day, may we honor what has been given to us and mourn what has been lost in service to this land. May we wrestle, even just a little, with our own feelings about war and use our wrestling to shine a light on who we are and what we believe. And may we each find our own ways to enter the joyful fire. Amen. Blessed be.